Good day and welcome back to another DBZ Dokkan Metal video. In this video we're going to be taking a look at AGL Metal Golden Cooler and seeing just how good he is in DBZ Dokkan Battle, basically as a unit. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see, I think, just how good he can be, and yeah, pretty good stuff. So let's take a look at him as a unit. Obviously pretty good stuff, I would say. Overall really solid defensive option, not as solid as maybe you'd like, but still pretty good. Crossover category lead of 150%, greatly raises attack and defense for 1 turn, attack and defense of 200%, and an additional attack and defense of 80% if HP is 50% or more when performing a super attack. Launches an additional attack that has a great chance of becoming a super attack. Damage reduction of 20%, and an additional key +1 attack of 40% up to 200%, and additional damage reduction of 8% up to 40% per crossover category ally on the team, which gives them a total damage reduction of 60%, which is really good. And his super attack will be sealed if his HP is 20% or below. Now ideally he's a really solid unit, but because of how low his defensive stat can be, you rely a lot on the damage reduction, because you need the damage reduction overall. Like, you need the big damage reduction. His defense doesn't get that high. It may feel like it gets high, it doesn't get that high. He's got a low defensive stat. Even the 200% defense doesn't actually count that much. So he's got strongest clan in space, auto regen, fusion, deficit boost, shocking speed, core judgment, and shattering the limit. All are very crucial to his defensive stat being remotely solid. But again, you're relying heavily on his damage reduction, more so than anything else. You need his damage reduction to be at its highest peak. Then he looks very good as a unit. But attack stat wise, we're seeing some really good numbers. Damage wise, we're seeing some good numbers. Defense wise, after super, we're seeing some incredibly good numbers after super. The 60% damage reduction does cover up for a lot, especially starter turn, but realistically speaking, it's after super attack where he starts to have some good defense. He can have close to 200k defense plus 60% damage reduction is pretty good stuff. I think is really good, like, just defensive unit. I think a lot of the time the one thing holding him back is definitely the low base stats. I think if he had a slightly higher base stats, he'd look really good, which means of course that dupes are super important. If you have dupes in AGL Golden Cooler, you see a very different unit than someone who doesn't, because of how his passive works, being a flat big passive. That extra defense matters huge and dramatically changes how good he looks. It makes him look like a completely different unit pretty much. So very interesting, I think, for me overall. Honestly, he's a good unit. I think depending on your dupes is going to change his position. If you have a lot of dupes, if you have a Rainbow Golden Cooler, he can potentially be a first slot unit. If you have a Golden Cooler that's not good dupes, then you could potentially be looking at a non-first slot unit. So definitely a super important just unit in general, I think, overall. So yeah, really good stuff, at least from my side. Overall though, it's really good as a unit. I think he's consistent. I think there is a consideration that he may struggle a little bit without dupes, and I think that is important to note. For me, he does have some failings as a unit, as a first slot unit, but I think overall he's an incredibly good second slot unit, 55%, and then potentially with dupes he could be an incredibly good first slot unit. 60% damage reduction is just about enough to really take the sting out of a lot of attacks, so it's not impossible for him to be really good. And with link leveling you can see a very consistent unit. However, links are a bit difficult with this guy. He does actually surprisingly have a very metal cooler sensitive link set, so he is basically the same as like a free-to-play metal cooler, which is weird, but is something to consider. But he is essentially the same as a free-to-play metal cooler, and so in this process, he essentially, does need to link up quite well. If you can link him with one of those coolers, is obviously great, but the big loss is then that you're losing the damage reduction obtained from his passive. So you want to stick to crossover units. The best crossover unit for him is going to be Golden Cooler. They share Strongest Clan, Space Sharing, Limit, and Core Judgment, which is huge for Metal Cooler by quite a long way. And then he shares, similarly decent links with Sealess. He shares decent links with any crossover unit that has Core Judgment is basically good for him to go. I think Super Saiyan 3 Go Tanks is also pretty decent. Poutine, who's obviously got some issues, but is still relatively solid. Robaloo is pretty good. He even links up decently with Janemba and Hearts in the sense that he gets a ton of really, really good links. The biggest issue is obviously hitting all of them. You'll need to do a combination of 2 units, and him being predominantly a first slot unit if you have dupes means it's probably not gonna happen. But at the same time, he could still be really solid. I think Core Judgment's obviously the premier link, going from 20% to 25% defense boost. Highly suggest that you focus on that, super important. And yeah, basically that's everything you need to know about him. I think he's really, really good. I do think he's heavily dupe dependent. I think on a crossover team with dupes, he can be an absolutely stunning unit. Big damage, good defense, obviously stemming from the damage reduction. And I think he definitely has a place where he thrives. I think 55% still a really good unit, just maybe preferably more a second slot unit than anything else. But that's it from me. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.